She worked with children, and parents trusted her. Gannon Stauch positioned herself as an education specialist, speaking of her advanced degree and her many years of experience working with youth, and people believed her because she knew how to make an impression. In South Carolina, she got a job as a teacher's assistant, and her colleagues initially spoke of her positively. Responsible, attentive, and good with children. And yet, this very woman, who was entrusted with other people's children, would later find herself at the center of one of the most horrific cases in Colorado history. But back then, in January 2020, no one yet knew that something entirely different was hidden behind the facade of a caring stepmother. On January 27th, a call came into emergency services. A woman's voice reported that her stepson had gone to a friend's house and had not returned. The voice sounded level, too level for someone who had just lost a loved one. No panic, no trembling, only clear, measured phrases, as if she had rehearsed every word in advance. The operator logged the report as a standard case and passed the information to the local precinct. Patrol officers arrived about 40 minutes later. Letitia met them calmly and explained that 11-year-old Gannon had returned from school around 3 in the afternoon, did his homework, and then, closer to 5, said he wanted to go to a neighbor's friend's house. She didn't object. He left, and she hadn't seen him since. There were no signs of a struggle in the house, no damage. Everything looked completely ordinary. Officers went around the nearby houses and spoke with neighbors, but no one had seen Gannon leave at the specified time. However, in the early hours, this was attributed to poor visibility. It was winter, the daylight hours were short, and perhaps people simply hadn't paid attention. Standard procedure required waiting, as missing children are often found at the homes of friends or relatives within the first 24 hours. By the next day, Letitia began giving interviews to local journalists. She said the right words, asked for help, and posted photos on social media. From the outside, it looked like the reaction of a person in despair, doing everything possible to find a child. But later, investigators would notice one detail. There was no tremor in her voice, no tears in her eyes, and she controlled every word and every gesture with a frightening precision. The first 48 hours yielded nothing at all. Search parties checked the entire surrounding area. Volunteers combed through parks and vacant lots, but there wasn't a single witness or a single lead. It was then that the police began to re-examine the timeline because the time Letitia provided did not align with the logic of movement. If the boy had indeed left the house at 5 in the evening and walked to the neighbors, why had no one seen him on the street? This wasn't a remote village in the middle of a forest. It was an ordinary, residential neighborhood where people walk dogs, return from work, and walk to their cars. And no one, absolutely no one, noticed an 11-year-old boy. Detectives contacted the family where Letitia claimed Gannon was heading. The answer was unexpected. None of them had seen the boy that evening. Their children claimed they hadn't arranged a meeting, and there were no messages or calls. Investigators then asked Letitia to clarify the details, and she calmly repeated her version without changing anything. He said he wanted to go to a friend's, left through the back door, and that was it. But how could he be going to people who weren't expecting him and knew nothing about a visit? On the third day, hundreds of volunteers joined the search. People organized themselves into groups. Some combed the roadsides, some checked abandoned lots, and others called stores and cafes along the main routes. Interestingly, Letitia took an active part in coordinating all of this. She handed out flyers, thanked everyone personally, and looked like someone who wasn't sleeping from worry. However, some volunteers would later note a strange thing. She never once went out on a search herself. She coordinated, gave interviews, and posted on social media. But she never once went to look for her stepson with everyone else. Bloodhounds, thermal images, drones. The result was zero. Not a single trace after 3 in the afternoon when Gannon returned from school. That was the last independent confirmation of his presence, because the school confirmed he had been in class and left for home at the usual time. From that point on, only Letitia had seen him, and her words remained the only source of information about what happened in the house between 3 and 5 o'clock. The longer the search continued, the more questions arose regarding that window of time. The answer came from where no one expected it. A neighbor, a few houses down from the Stauchs, had installed a surveillance camera that captured part of the street along with the driveway. Detectives requested the footage, and what they saw completely overturned everything Letitia had told them. At about 4 in the afternoon, Gannon is seen leaving the house and getting into his stepmother's car. He doesn't walk to a friend's house as she claimed. He sits in the front passenger seat of her vehicle. The car pulls out of the driveway and disappears from the camera's view. And here is the most important part. The car returned several hours later. Letitia got out alone, and Gannon did not get out of the car. Not at that moment, not later, not ever again. The camera recorded that area until morning, and it did not record the boy returning. Detectives summoned Letitia for another interrogation, and she suddenly changed her testimony. Now she claimed that yes, she actually did give her stepson a ride at his request, dropped him off near his friend's house, and returned home. Why hadn't she mentioned this immediately? She forgot due to stress. There was too much going on, and her head was spinning. Police checked the spot where she supposedly dropped the boy off. There were no cameras there, neighbors saw nothing, and no confirmation of her words could be found. An interesting picture was emerging. First, she says the boy left on foot. Then it turns out she was driving him somewhere. 2 completely different stories, and neither was confirmed by anything other than her own words. Investigators began to realize they were dealing not just with contradictions in testimony, but with something far more serious. That same day, Letitia's status changed. She moved from the category of a reporting party to a person of interest requiring close attention. Parallel to this, covert surveillance was established over all her movements. Every trip was recorded. Every contact was documented. Meanwhile, she continued to give interviews and participate in search activities, completely unaware that her every step was now being monitored. A few days later, Letitia agreed to a large interview with a local TV channel. She wanted to appeal to the public, ask for help, and show she was doing everything possible to find her stepson. This recording would later become a key piece of evidence, though not in the way she intended. On camera, she said the right words, talked about Gannon, his hobbies, and what kind of boy he was. No behavioral analysis specialists immediately noticed one detail. She spoke of him in the past tense. Not he likes, but he liked. Not he wants to be an engineer, but he wanted to. This is a very telling sign, because people who believe in a positive outcome do not speak that way. When a person hopes to find a loved one alive, they automatically use the present tense. It happens on a subconscious level. And there was another strangeness. Instead of calling for searchers and pleading for help, she somehow began to defend herself. She explained why she let him go alone, why she hadn't checked sooner, why she didn't raise the alarm immediately. A person in genuine grief is usually focused on finding the missing person, not on justifying their own actions. Her facial expressions also raised questions. She smiled in completely inappropriate places, frequently touched her face, and the expression in her eyes did not match what she was saying. Journalists brushed these quirks off as shock and stress, but detectives saw something else. A person who was carefully controlling every gesture and every word. After this interview, police restricted Letitia's access to the house. Officially, this was explained as a need for additional inspection, but in reality, they wanted to preserve potential evidence. She was moved in with relatives, and here too was an interesting point. She did not object. It is strange, because a person who has lost a loved one usually wants to stay close to the place where they saw them last, close to their things and memories. Instead, she simply packed a bag and left, as if she didn't care. On January 30th, forensic experts obtained a warrant for a full search of the house. 4 specialists with a full set of equipment worked there for over 8 hours, and what they discovered finally changed the direction of the entire investigation. At first glance, everything looked normal, even too normal for a house where a search for a missing child was underway. Gannon's room was perfectly tidy. The bed was made neatly. Textbooks were stacked in an orderly pile on the desk. Not a single thing was out of place. But what immediately caught their eye was that the concentration of chlorine in the air was several times higher than normal. This doesn't happen after ordinary cleaning. It meant someone had performed a very serious sanitization, and clearly not just to tidy up. Forensic experts applied luminol to the floor near the bed and turned off the lights. The room literally glowed. A characteristic blue glow appeared on a section measuring about 1/2 meter by 1/2 meter. This is a positive reaction to hemoglobin, meaning blood. They then checked the wall behind the bed and found traces there as well. Small brown spots on the light wallpaper, very tiny, from 1 to 3 millimeters, but arranged in a fan-like pattern. This pattern is very important because such a distribution of spatters indicates a sudden mechanical impact. Someone had tried to wash it all away, but microparticles remained in the texture of the wallpaper. The mattress under the sheet gave an even more intense reaction. The soaking had penetrated to a depth of about 7 centimeters and covered an area of more than a square meter. Such a volume cannot be explained by a domestic injury, a cut finger, or a bloody nose. It was something else entirely. The carpeting was cut out in whole sections and sent for testing, and beneath it, traces of washing were found on the concrete base. Someone had used a lot of water and chemicals to get rid of whatever had happened here. Samples were sent to the FBI lab, and the house officially became a crime scene. Yellow tape around the perimeter, sealed doors, round-the-clock security. From that moment on, it was no longer about a missing child, but about something much more terrible. Surveillance of Letitia continued, and on February 3rd, something unusual was recorded. Around 9 in the morning, she left the house and headed toward Denver, but not by the usual route. She drove past the 3 nearest stores and only stopped at a shopping center on the very outskirts of the city. Someone clearly did not want to be recognized. First stop, 22 minutes in a hardware store. Later, receipts would establish exactly what she bought: bleach, rubber gloves, large trash bags, and upholstery cleaner. Second stop, a car rental office. 40 minutes inside. Then she came out with keys in hand and got into a grey sedan. She left her own car in the parking lot. This raises a logical question. Why rent a car if your own is fully functional? One surveillance team stayed to watch her car. The second followed the rented sedan. The next day, Letitia showed up for a scheduled interrogation and suddenly produced a completely new version of events. Now she claimed she had seen some unknown man near their house. A Hispanic man of medium height with dark hair. She even gave a name: Eduardo. Supposedly, this man was talking to Gannon through the fence that very day. And perhaps he was somehow connected to the boy's disappearance. Detectives, of course, checked everything. They pulled databases, checked registrations, requested information from immigration services, and combed through criminal records across 3 states. Not a single person with that name was found within a 100-mile radius. Surveillance cameras did not record any strangers near the Stauch home that day. Neighbors saw no unknown man. The version fell apart in just a few hours, but Letitia continued to insist. She demanded they look for this Eduardo, accused the police of inaction, and said they were wasting time on her instead of catching the real criminal. A cognitive interviewing specialist worked with her for 4 hours, trying to reconstruct the details of this encounter. Interestingly, she could not name a single sensory detail. No smells, no sounds, no tactile sensations. Only a visual image, and even that kept changing. Eduardo's height was sometimes 170 centimeters, sometimes 180. The color of his jacket was sometimes black, sometimes dark blue. His age was sometimes 30, sometimes 45. People who have actually seen something remember events in multiple dimensions, while those who invent things only operate with pictures in their heads. The investigation had gained another piece of evidence of conscious lying. On February 7th, surveillance recorded movement toward the state border. Letitia got into that same rented sedan and headed toward Florida. Without warning, without permission to leave the jurisdiction, she just packed up and left. Agents shadowed her for hundreds of miles while the prosecutor's office urgently prepared the arrest warrants. While she was driving through several states, the analysis results came back from the FBI lab. All the samples the forensic team had collected in the bedroom, all those stains on the mattress, the spatters on the walls, the traces on the carpet, gave a perfect match. The biological material belonged to Gannon Stauch. The probability of error was less than 1 in a billion, practically 0. It wasn't an accident, a domestic injury, or a bloody nose during play. The volume and nature of the traces indicated events with irreversible consequences. The prosecutor's office immediately reclassified the case. Gannon's status changed from missing to a victim of a serious crime, and Letitia officially moved from the category of witness to the category of prime suspect. The arrest warrant was signed that same day, and federal marshals were instructed to detain her in Florida. But that wasn't all. Parallel to the analysis of the biological samples, specialists were working with her phone, which had been seized in the early days of the investigation. Data extraction software recovered a deleted browser history spanning several months, and these search queries told the story better than any testimony. January 27th, 4:22 p.m. Ways to stop heavy blood loss. 14 minutes later. How much blood can a person lose and stay alive? Note the timing of these queries, as it exactly coincides with the period between Gannon's return from school and the 911 call. In other words, while the boy was supposedly quietly doing his homework and getting ready to see a friend, she was searching the internet for information on fatal blood loss. And it got worse. Around 2 a.m. that same day, entirely different queries began. How fast does organic matter decompose in water? What depth is needed for total disappearance? Water temperature and rate of processes. Every query was recorded to the second. Geolocation confirmed the phone was in the Stauch home, and the IP address belonged to the home network. The digital trail tied her to the events absolutely irrefutably. GPS data from the rented car gave the investigation a complete picture of her movements. The system recorded coordinates every 30 seconds, and thousands of points lined up into a single, continuous path that told more than any testimony. The route turned out to be strange. She didn't take the shortest path to Florida. Instead, she started bypassing major cities, first Kansas, then Oklahoma, Arkansas, Tennessee. Each time, she chose roads with fewer surveillance cameras, fewer gas stations with video recording, and fewer chances of being noticed. Someone had thought out this route very well, and that someone clearly did not want to leave traces. On February 7th, at about 2 a.m, the GPS recorded a stop on a bridge in Pace, Florida. The car stood in one spot for 11 minutes before moving on. At the time, no one understood why that specific point was so important. But later, everything would fall into place with frightening accuracy. After this stop, Letitia headed to Jacksonville, spent a couple of days with some distant relatives, and then turned around and drove back to Colorado. The total mileage was over 4,000 miles. The distance from the house to that bridge was clearly not chosen by chance. Far enough to hinder search efforts, and secluded enough for no one to see anything. Investigators overlaid the GPS data on a map of her bank transactions, and everything matched perfectly. Every gas station corresponded to a coordinate stop. Every food purchase tied to the timestamps. And that very check from the hardware store in Denver, where she bought bleach, gloves, and trash bags, was dated the day before the trip. She was preparing. She had planned everything in advance. On March 2nd, the news came that everyone had been waiting for, and, at the same time, dreaded hearing. A road crew was cleaning the area under that very bridge in Pace, and one of the workers noticed a dark object in the brush near the water. It was a large black suitcase that had been lying there for several weeks. The area under the bridge was cordoned off within a 50-meter radius. Forensic experts extracted the suitcase following all protocols, and when it was opened, it became clear that the search for Gannon Stauch was over. Just not in the way everyone had hoped. The FBI got involved that same evening. The suitcase was photographed from all sides before being opened, and detectives from Colorado received these images just a few hours later. Comparison with surveillance footage took less than an hour because it was the same suitcase, the same scratches on the wheels, the same broken handle on the left side, the very same suitcase the neighbor's camera had recorded on the night Letitia was carrying something heavy out of the house at 2 in the morning. DNA analysis was performed on an expedited basis, and 48 hours later, the results came back. A total match with the samples from the bedroom. Gannon Stauch was officially identified. He was 11 years old, dreamed of becoming an engineer, loved building models and taking apart mechanisms. Teachers noted his curiosity and said he had a bright future. And now he was found in a suitcase under a bridge, thousands of miles from home. The forensic medical examination took several days, and its results proved to be even more horrific than anyone could have imagined. Multiple stab wounds to the chest and abdomen, at least 7 strikes, trauma to the head area. The experts noted the extreme cruelty with which it was all done. The boy never stood a chance. The GPS coordinates of the rental car matched the location where the suitcase was found to within a few meters. That 11-minute stop at 2 in the morning, when the car was parked on the bridge, now had its explanation. She had come here specifically, choosing this place in advance because it was far enough from Colorado and secluded enough for no one to notice anything. The investigation now had the full picture. Biological traces in the bedroom, search queries on the phone, surveillance footage, GPS data, and now the body, found exactly where all these digital trails led. The prosecutor's office reclassified the charges to the most serious count: first-degree murder with extreme cruelty. While the court materials were being prepared, detectives dug deeper into Letitia's past. They requested files from other states, contacted former employers, and pulled old cases. And here, a completely different picture began to emerge. Behind the facade of a respectable woman who worked with children and whom everyone trusted, a completely different story was hidden. South Carolina, 2012. Letitia got a job as a teacher's assistant at a local school, and at first, everything went well. Colleagues spoke of her positively, saying she was responsible and got along well with children. But 8 months later, she was fired. The official wording was unsuitability for the position, but a memo left in the school's internal documents said something completely different: the disappearance of $300 from the school cash register. The case was not handed over to the police. The administration preferred a quiet dismissal to avoid a scandal. And so, this woman, who was caught stealing at a school, later quietly moved to another state and continued to build her career as if nothing had happened. Georgia, 2015. Letitia filed a claim with an insurance company about a theft from her car and received a payout of $4,000. 6 months later, another claim, another payout. An insurance investigator suspected fraud and began an inquiry, but there wasn't enough evidence, and the case was closed. She got the money and moved on. Texas, 2017. Here, the story was even more interesting. Letitia accused her neighbor of stalking and threats, demanded a protection order, and told everyone what a dangerous person he was. For 3 months, this man lived under suspicion until he provided surveillance footage that completely refuted her testimony. The judge ruled all the accusations false and issued her an official warning for providing knowingly false testimony. An FBI specialist compiled a psychological profile based on all this data. 11 pages of analysis, and the conclusions were unambiguous. a pathological inclination for deception, a lack of empathy, and a constant need for control and manipulation. A person capable of maintaining a false image for years without feeling any remorse. And it was precisely such a person who was trusted to raise an 11-year-old boy. On February the 23rd, Letitia was brought to the El Paso County Jail. The interrogation began at 9 in the morning. Everything was recorded on video. She sat in handcuffs, but her facial expression was absolutely calm, almost relaxed, as if she had come for an ordinary conversation rather than an interrogation in a murder case. The detective placed the first photograph on the table, a surveillance camera shot, her car, Gannon's silhouette in the passenger seat, timestamp 1607. Letitia looked at the picture, shrugged, and said she had already explained this situation. She simply forgot to mention the trip due to severe stress. Her voice was steady, no nervousness. Then a second photograph was placed on the table. Night footage, she is carrying a large black suitcase out of the house. Time 2:14 a.m. It is clear that the suitcase is very heavy. She struggles to lift it and load it into the trunk. And right then, her face changed for the first time. This was the first real reaction during the entire interrogation. She began to speak faster, explaining that she was taking old clothes to charity. In the middle of the night, in the midst of the search for the missing child, the detectives watched her in silence, letting her hear for herself how absurd it sounded. Then they pulled out a printout of search queries from her phone. 4 pages, each query with a precise time and date. Letitia glanced at the papers and pushed them away sharply. She started saying that someone else had used the phone. Then she said it was a virus. Then that she had been hacked. 3 completely different explanations in 2 minutes. Her hands began to shake. Her voice grew louder, and now she no longer looked so calm and confident. 40 minutes into the interrogation, she suddenly grabbed her chest and demanded a doctor. The interrogation was paused. A medic was called, but they found no abnormalities. Blood pressure, normal. Pulse, stable. A common simulation, an attempt to interrupt an uncomfortable conversation. When the interrogation resumed, she refused to answer any questions without a lawyer. At 16:30, the prosecutor officially brought the charge. First-degree murder. Bail was set at $1 million, an amount she had no way of raising. And it was here, for the first time, that something resembling real fear appeared on her face. She finally realized the game was over. The investigation gathered all the data and reconstructed the full chronology of what happened on January 27th. Every element was confirmed by independent sources: cameras, GPS, bank transactions, digital queries. And this reconstruction, minute by minute, paints a truly terrifying picture. 15:03. Gannon returns home from school. A neighbor's camera captures his silhouette at the front door. An ordinary day, an ordinary return, backpack over his shoulders, homework ahead, and maybe a walk to see friends. He enters the house where his stepmother is waiting for him, and the door closes behind him. 15:47. Less than an hour after his return, the first search query appears on Letitia's phone. Ways to stop heavy blood loss. This means that by this point, something had already happened. Something that forced her to look for such information. The boy had been home for less than 45 minutes when it all began. Based on the nature of the traces in the bedroom, experts determined that everything happened on the bed. The direction of the spatters on the wall indicated a horizontal position of the source, meaning Gannon was lying down when he was attacked. Multiple strikes from top to bottom, then a head injury. Everything took several minutes. An 11-year-old boy had no chance against an adult woman with a knife. Then the cleanup began. Chlorine-based cleaners, changing the bed linens, repeated wiping of walls and floors. At 2300 hours, a new query appears on the phone. Ways to remove stubborn stains from fabric. She was methodically destroying the evidence of what she had done, while simultaneously searching the internet for tips on how to do it better. 2:14 a.m. A neighbor's camera captures her carrying that very suitcase out of the house. It is visible that it is very heavy. She puts it on the ground twice before managing the weight. Then she returns to the house for 17 minutes, comes out with additional bags, and loads everything into the car. 2:41. The car leaves the driveway and heads southeast. Ahead is a drive of more than a day to Florida, to that bridge in Pace County, where she will dispose of the body. And then she will return home, call the police, and say that her stepson went to a friend's house and didn't return. And she will give interviews, hand out flyers, and coordinate volunteers, portraying a grief-stricken stepmother. The trial began in April 2023, and Letitia's defense chose a strategy no one expected. Insanity, dissociative identity disorder, multiple personalities. According to her lawyers, she was not in control of her actions at the moment of the crime, because several different personalities live inside her, and one of them, not Letitia herself, committed the murder. And so a real performance began in the courtroom. She talked to herself, changed her voice, and claimed she heard other people in her head. She called one of these personalities Bertie, another simply the voice. At times she acted like a small child, at times like an aggressive man, and at times she just sat and stared into space, pretending she didn't understand where she was. But here is what's interesting. All these manifestations began only after she was charged. For 3 years before the trial, during the entire time she lived an ordinary life, worked, interacted with people, and raised her stepson. Not a single person noticed anything like this. Not colleagues, not neighbors, not relatives, no one. Multiple personalities appeared exactly when she needed an explanation for her actions. The prosecution invited 3 independent psychiatrists, and all 3 reached the same conclusion. Fully sane, fully aware of the nature of her actions. No signs of dissociative disorder. Experts noted the characteristic signs of simulation, because she made mistakes that are untypical for real patients with such a diagnosis. People with actual dissociative identity disorder do not control when the switch between personalities occurs. Yet, Letitia somehow changed her voices and behavior exactly at the moments when it was convenient for the defense. Too convenient to be true. On May 3rd, the jury retired for deliberation. The discussion took less than 3 hours, which is very little for a case of such complexity. This meant they had no serious doubts. The verdict? Guilty on all counts. First-degree murder with extreme cruelty, aggravating circumstances in the form of tampering with evidence and attempting to mislead the investigation. Letitia listened to the decision without any visible reaction. No tears, no emotions, just a blank stare at the wall. The same mask she had worn from the very beginning. Even now, when it was all over, she did not show a single drop of remorse. On May 8th, the judge announced the sentence: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In his closing statement, he noted the exceptional cruelty of the crime and the defendant's complete lack of remorse. She killed an 11-year-old child who was entrusted to her care, and then, for several weeks, portrayed a grief-stricken stepmother, gave interviews, coordinated searches, and looked into the eyes of his biological father, knowing that the boy's body lay in a suitcase under a bridge in Florida. After the sentencing, Gannon's father, Al Stauch, spoke to journalists. His voice trembled, but his words sounded firm. He spoke about his son, about his smile, about dreams that will now never come true. Gannon wanted to become an engineer. He loved taking mechanisms apart and building models. Teachers said he had a bright mind and a great future. And now that future is gone. Justice has prevailed, Al said, but it will never fill the void left after his son's death. Gannon's biological mother, Landon Hirschman, did not miss a single court session. She sat in the courtroom and looked into the eyes of the woman who took her child from her. After the sentence, she thanked the investigators and prosecutors for their work, but it was clear that no sentence is capable of returning what she lost. The family established the Gannon Stauch Foundation. The funds are directed to child protection programs in Colorado to somehow turn this tragedy into something that helps others. This case also changed the protocols for handling missing children reports in El Paso County. Now, any discrepancy in testimony automatically triggers an expanded check, and surveillance camera footage is requested within the first 12 hours. It took the death of a child for the system to start changing. Gannon Stauch is currently held in a Colorado State women's correctional facility. A single cell, 23 hours of isolation per day. She is prohibited from corresponding with minors and from any contact with the outside world except for her lawyer, without the possibility of parole. Ever. And perhaps the most terrifying part of this story is that she was trusted. Parents trusted her with their children when she worked at the school. A father trusted her with his son when he went away for service. Everyone saw a caring woman with a good reputation. And no one saw what was hidden behind that mask. Subscribe to our channel. Write what you think about this story in the comments. See you soon.